Have you ever sat across from a boss making 3 times your salary, forced to explain basic supply chain mechanics? I let them humiliate me. I let human resources dock my hard-earned pay, nodding along like a defeated victim. But corporate bullies always forget one thing. When you strip away my reason to tolerate you, you hand me the absolute freedom to ruin you. Grab a strong drink. This is not about forgiveness. This is a perfectly calculated demolition. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to be completely honest with you guys. YouTube recently disabled the monetization feature on our channel, leaving us without the operating budget to keep producing these videos. If you find today's story entertaining, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to exclusive, true stories that are even better, featuring multiple emotional voice actors in a single narrative content we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the comments section of this video. Now, let us begin today's story, where I, Melody Rogers, will walk you through my masterpiece. I am 34 years old, and I work as a senior supply chain analyst at Novapulse Logistics. Novapulse is one of those rapidly rising tech logistics companies, flying high on venture capital and a whole lot of arrogance. Personally, I am entirely pragmatic. I am sharp. I base every single decision on hard data, and I could not care less about empty corporate slogans. I am the person who actually makes sure the freight moves from point A to point B without the company bleeding cash. Then came Julian Vance, our brand new Chief Operating Officer. Julian was a walking, talking cliché straight out of Silicon Valley. He strutted around the office wearing tailored suits that cost more than my car, constantly dropping buzzwords like ecosystem optimization, synergistic alignment, and disruptive paradigm shifts. But beneath that expensive, shiny exterior, the man was completely hollow. It took me exactly 3 days to realize he did not even know how to read a basic financial balance sheet. Julian was a parasite, plain and simple. He built his entire executive reputation by sucking the life out of the people doing the actual work. He would routinely take my meticulously crafted logistics reports, slap his name on the cover, and present them to the board of directors as his own brilliant strategic insights. Whenever a project succeeded, Julian was the visionary mastermind. But the exact moment a risk materialized or a delivery route experienced delays, he would instantly shift the blame downward, throwing his subordinates under the bus without a second thought. I tolerated it at first, because in corporate America, you learn to let the suits take the credit as long as your paycheck clears on the 15th and the 30th of every month. But then he crossed a line that I could not ignore. The first real conflict ignited on a mundane Tuesday morning. Julian called me into his glass-walled office and casually slid a contract across his mahogany desk. He wanted me to sign off on an exclusive, multi-year shipping agreement with a vendor called Apex Solutions. I had never heard of them. I took one look at the pricing tier and almost laughed in his face. Their rates were a staggering 45% higher than the current market average. Not 4%, not 5%, but 45%. Julian, I cannot authorize this, I said, sliding the folder right back to him. Apex Solutions has no track record in our database, and their freight costs are entirely uncompetitive. I need to run a standard due diligence process and open this up for transparent bidding before we commit to anything. Julian's fake, polished smile vanished instantly. His jaw tightened, and the mask slipped. Melody, this is an executive directive. We need to move fast to secure our logistics pipeline. Just sign the approval sheet so we can onboard them by the 1st of the month. Without a background check and a competitive bid? Absolutely not. My signature means the data supports the decision. The data here screams financial negligence, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice. He just stared at me with a cold, venomous hostility that made the hairs on my arms stand up. In that brief moment, I saw exactly how his mind worked. He did not see a dedicated employee protecting the company's bottom line. He saw my professionalism as a direct threat. To him, I was a roadblock that needed to be completely eradicated. I walked out of his office feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of a toxic environment settling in. I knew exactly how these corporate games were played, and I knew Julian would not just let this go, but instead of marching down to human resources or starting a very loud office war. I chose the quiet route. I smiled in the hallways. I nodded in the team meetings, and the very next day, I brought a secure, encrypted personal hard drive into the office. Every single time Julian sent me an absurd request, an aggressive email, or a highly questionable financial directive, I quietly backed it up. I became an observer, sitting silently in the shadows, collecting every single piece of ammunition I would eventually need. It did not take long for the retaliation to begin. Julian was not the type to confront someone directly. He was a coward who fought his battles through bureaucratic warfare. Over the next 2 weeks, he launched a highly calculated, silent smear campaign against me. I started noticing the subtle, insidious shifts in the office dynamic. Projects I had managed flawlessly for years were suddenly flagged for minor, nonsensical administrative reviews. But his real weapon of choice was the email trail. Julian began sending blind-copied messages to human resources, expressing his deep, manufactured concern over my inflexible and uncooperative attitude. He painted himself as a visionary leader who was unfortunately being held back by a stubborn, legacy-minded employee who simply refused to embrace agile business methodologies. This is where Chloe Sterling officially entered the game. Chloe was our director of human resources, a woman who practically breathed toxic positivity. If you walked into her office, you would be assaulted by pastel-colored motivational posters demanding that you find your joy and embrace the corporate journey. She spoke in a soft, breathy, patronizing tone that made you feel like you were a misbehaving toddler rather than a seasoned professional. But underneath that sickeningly sweet veneer, Chloe was an absolute shark. She was Julian's closest ally. The office rumor mill always hinted at a highly inappropriate, mutually beneficial relationship between the two of them. Considering how quickly and ruthlessly she weaponized her department to protect him, I knew those rumors were entirely true. The trap was finally sprung on a late Thursday afternoon. I received a sudden, vague calendar invitation from Chloe for a quick sync-up. There was no agenda attached, no context provided. It was just a 15-minute block scheduled for 4:30. When I walked into the Human Resources conference room, the heavy atmosphere hit me immediately. I realized I was walking into a meticulously planned ambush. Julian was already sitting at the polished glass table, his arms crossed over his chest, wearing a smug, arrogant expression. Chloe sat at the head of the table, her hands neatly folded over a thick manila folder. The air in the room was suffocating, dense with the unspoken reality of the power dynamic they had constructed. They had cornered me. "Melody, please, take a seat," Chloe said, using that aggressively gentle voice of hers. "We are here today because we want to support you. We genuinely want to help you grow within this organization, but Julian has brought some troubling cultural misalignment issues to my attention." She opened the folder and began sliding printed pieces of paper across the table. It was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. They had manufactured an entire narrative of incompetence and hostility. Chloe read aloud from anonymous complaints. Complaints I knew for a fact Julian had fabricated himself. They claimed I created a hostile work environment, that I was a bottleneck to innovation, and that I openly disrespected executive leadership. They took completely normal, professional emails I had sent regarding compliance and supply chain regulations and twisted them to look like blatant insubordination. I sat there, my blood running cold as I listened to them systematically assassinate my professional character. I braced myself for the termination speech, but the termination never came. They did not want to fire me. More importantly, they could not fire me. They desperately needed my operational expertise to keep their fragile logistics network from completely collapsing while they played their little executive games. They just wanted to break me. "Because we believe in second chances," Chloe continued. placing her hand over her heart as if she were delivering a profound act of mercy. "We are placing you on a mandatory disciplinary culture improvement program for the next 90 days. Furthermore, due to the severity of these infractions regarding company alignment, Human Resources is officially docking your upcoming quarterly performance bonus." I felt a sharp, agonizing knot twist in my stomach. My quarterly bonus was not some trivial perk or a pat on the back. It accounted for a full 30% of my total compensation package. They were effectively stealing the equivalent of one entire month of my hard-earned salary. One whole month of grueling overtime, weekend shifts, and late-night supply chain crises, completely wiped out with a single stroke of Chloe's pen. "This is a necessary step to realign your priorities with the vision of this company." "Melody," Julian chimed in, leaning forward with a predatory grin. "We need team players here, not roadblocks." Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stand up, flip the glass table, and scream at them for this blatant, disgusting fraud. I wanted to drag them to court, but my analytical mind quickly calculated the odds. If I fought back right then and there, in a room where they completely controlled the narrative, I would instantly be labeled a disruptive troublemaker. They would terminate me for cause, denying me any severance package, and I would be locked out of the company servers within 5 minutes. I would lose all my access, all my data, and all my leverage. So, I did the only thing a smart analyst does when the variables are entirely stacked against them. I recalibrated. I looked at the disciplinary documents sitting on the table. I picked up the heavy metal pen provided by Chloe. I took a deep, steadying breath, suppressing the burning rage inside my chest, and I forced the corners of my mouth to curl upward into a soft, defeated smile. "I understand," I said, keeping my voice quiet and perfectly submissive. "I see now how my strict focus on the data might have come across as inflexible to leadership. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. I promise I will change my attitude moving forward." I signed the document and pushed it back across the table. Julian and Chloe exchanged a quick, victorious glance. They were absolutely thrilled. They genuinely believed they had just successfully broken the most stubborn, independent, analytical mind in the entire company. They thought they had won the war. As I walked out of that suffocating room, keeping my head bowed in fake shame, I realized something beautiful. By stealing my money and stripping away my dignity, they had completely removed my moral obligation to play by their rules. They thought they had domesticated me, but in reality, they had just hand-activated a devastating time bomb, and I was going to make sure the explosion left absolutely nothing behind. For the next 30 days, I delivered an absolute masterclass in corporate submission. I played the role of the thoroughly tamed, broken employee to perfection. I attended every single mandatory culture improvement seminar without a hint of irony, nodding enthusiastically as a ridiculously upbeat consultant lectured us on the power of synergistic mindfulness and workplace harmony. I submitted my weekly supply chain reports 2 full days ahead of schedule, completely stripped of any critical financial analysis that might offend executive sensibilities. I even started picking up a massive, grossly overpriced iced caramel macchiato for Julian every morning, placing it gently on his mahogany desk with a bright, vacant smile. "Good morning, Julian. The updated vendor metrics are already sitting in your inbox," I would say, watching his chest puff out with unearned pride. He loved it. He soaked up my forced obedience like a sponge. Entirely convinced that his brutal management tactics had successfully realigned my priorities and crushed my rebellious spirit. But the exact moment the sun went down and the glass office building emptied out, my real work began. While Julian and Chloe were likely out spending their bloated executive salaries on overpriced dinners, I was sitting alone in my dark apartment, the cold blue light of my dual monitors reflecting off my glasses. Underneath the facade of a defeated analyst, my mind was running at 100% capacity. As a senior member of the logistics engineering team, I possessed deep administrative access to the company's back-end infrastructure, a privilege Julian was entirely too technologically illiterate to understand or revoke. I booted up a secure virtual private network, routed my connection through an encrypted proxy server to ensure my internal footprint remained completely invisible to the IT department, and started digging into Apex Solutions. The deeper I went into the system architecture, the colder the room seemed to get. I started with the basics, pulling up the vendor onboarding files that Julian had forced into the system. According to the initial paperwork, Apex was supposedly handling 20% of our regional freight volume, but when I cross-referenced their submitted manifest logs with our actual warehouse GPS tracking data, I found absolutely zero matching truck coordinates. No license plates were registered at the security gates. No driver identification numbers matched the union databases. No way station receipts had been scanned into the portal. I decided to pull their state registration records. It took me 3 solid hours of digging through public business databases to find their corporate filing. Apex Solutions was not headquartered in a bustling industrial park like their glossy website claimed. Their official corporate address was a single, tiny post office box located inside a strip mall in Wilmington, Delaware. I ran their tax identification number through a federal registry. It came back registered to an entirely different, defunct shell company that had been legally dissolved 5 years ago. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Apex Solutions was not just a terrible vendor artificially inflating prices by 45%. Apex Solutions simply did not exist. There were no trucks. There were no warehouses. It was a digital ghost. If the company did not exist, where were the millions of dollars in freight fees actually going? I cracked my knuckles, opened up a secure command terminal, and started pulling the raw transaction logs from our finance servers. Nova Pulse Logistics paid its legitimate vendors through standard automated clearinghouse transfers, usually settling invoices within net 30 or net 60 days. But the Apex invoices were completely different. They were flagged for immediate, expedited payout, bypassing the standard 30-day waiting period. I traced the routing numbers. The money was not going into a standard corporate checking account. The funds were being washed through an international payment processor and instantly converted into a decentralized cryptocurrency wallet. It is highly unusual for a multi-million-dollar tech logistics firm to pay a freight carrier through an intermediary processor that specializes in cross-border digital asset conversions. The money was being funneled into a cascading series of wallets, designed to tumble the funds and obscure the final destination. Millions of dollars of company capital were vanishing into a digital black hole. But there was still a massive missing piece to the puzzle. Our finance department had strict, automated software safeguards. Any invoice over $50,000 required a secondary executive verification to prevent exactly this kind of fraud. The system should have immediately blocked these massive, expedited payments to an unverified, newly onboarded vendor. I queried the back-end override logs, searching for the specific user ID that was bypassing the financial security alerts. The search query loaded for an agonizing 10 seconds before the result populated on my screen. I stared at the name, letting the sheer audacity of the betrayal wash over me. The final digital signature stamping the approval on every single fake Apex invoice did not belong to the finance director or the accounting manager. It belonged to Chloe Sterling. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Chloe was not just protecting Julian out of some twisted, toxic loyalty or human resources office politics. She was not merely covering up for an arrogant operations manager to maintain the corporate status quo. They were partners in a massive, highly coordinated embezzlement ring. Julian used his executive authority to create the fake vendor and force the fraudulent contracts into the system, pushing the fake invoices downward and commanding his subordinates to process them. Then, Chloe used her supreme administrative access in human resources to override the finance department's fraud alerts, rubber stamping the payments and ensuring the money flowed seamlessly out of the company and into their untraceable crypto wallets. My stolen quarterly bonus was not just a punishment for insubordination. It was a desperate, calculated move to silence the only supply chain analyst capable of exposing their massive criminal enterprise. I did not feel anger. I felt an absolute, terrifying clarity. Over the next 3 weeks, my apartment became a war room. I meticulously gathered every single scrap of digital evidence. I pulled the exact Internet Protocol addresses used to access the crypto wallet, mapping them directly back to Julian's private home network. I downloaded the forged, amateurish invoices, noting how the typography on the stamps lacked the standard degradation you see on real scanned logistical documents. The final nail in the coffin came when I bypassed the primary communications servers and accessed the company's redundant cloud backups. I managed to recover over 200 deleted direct messages between Julian and Chloe on our internal chat platform. Did the transfer clear the finance block? Yes, the override is active. The funds are moving. Make sure the supply chain girl stays quiet. Keep her locked on that disciplinary program. I compiled every single system log, every deleted message, every fake tax record, and every encrypted signature into a massive, undeniable 40-page document. It was a flawless, irrefutable death dossier. They thought they had buried me beneath their corporate authority and their fake moral superiority. They did not realize I was quietly digging their graves right beneath their feet. The success of their initial theft acted like an accelerant on Julian's already massive ego. His greed rapidly mutated into an arrogant, reckless hunger. During the end-of-month executive briefing, I sat quietly in the back row, taking immaculate notes while he pitched a massive, aggressive expansion of our logistics network. He paced across the stage in a bespoke $3,000 suit, pointing his laser at completely fabricated growth trajectory charts. With a straight face, he boldly proposed that the board of directors inject an additional $5 million into the Apex Solutions contract starting on the first day of the upcoming quarter. $5 million. He spun a brilliant narrative about securing exclusive freight lanes, acting utterly confident that his absolute executive authority would prevent anyone from ever daring to audit his books or verify his vendors. He genuinely believed he was untouchable. The very next morning, an email from Chloe pinged into my inbox. The subject line read, "Checking in. Culture alignment progress." It was a breathtaking masterpiece of corporate condescension. She spent the first paragraph praising my recent behavioral improvements, noting my renewed commitment to a positive team ecosystem, and my willingness to embrace dynamic leadership. However, the second paragraph was a velvet-wrapped knife. She mockingly informed me that despite my visible progress, human resources would absolutely not be retroactively restoring the 30% of my quarterly bonus they had stolen. She claimed the penalty had to stand as a permanent reminder of our company values. She ended the email with a cheerful, sickening mandate. Keep striving for excellence, Melody. True culture shifts take time and sacrifice. I read the email 3 times. 6 months ago, I would have stormed into her office, slammed my fists on her desk, and demanded my money. Now, I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I felt a profound, chilling sense of calm. That Friday evening, I did not drive back to my apartment. Instead, I drove 45 miles out of the city limits to a decaying public library in a quiet, forgotten suburban neighborhood where absolutely no one knew my face. I paid for a guest computer pass using a prepaid debit card I had purchased with cash 2 weeks prior. I walked past the dusty bookshelves and sat down at a public terminal in the darkest back corner of the room, positioning my body to block any line of sight from the overhead security cameras. I booted the machine from a live operating system installed on my personal flash drive, ensuring that absolutely no data would ever touch the library computer's internal hard drive. I connected through a triple-layered encrypted virtual private network, routing my internet traffic through several international nodes before finally creating a completely anonymous email account using a highly secure Swiss domain provider. Then, I began the upload. I watched the progress bar slowly fill as I attached the 40-page death dossier. The evidence was pristine and irrefutable. I attached the network protocol logs linking to Julian's house, the recovered chat transcripts detailing their conspiracy, the amateurish fake invoices, and the complex cryptocurrency routing maps. I compiled the distribution list meticulously, verifying every single address. I added the private, direct email addresses of every single member of the board of directors, I added the top 5 institutional shareholders who funded our operations. And finally, the ultimate kill shot. I added the official whistleblower intake address for the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. I did not hit send. Doing so would have triggered a weekend panic, giving them time to hide, to delete files, or to craft a defense. Instead, I carefully configured an automated, delayed delivery protocol. I set the server timer to execute the broadcast on a very specific date, at a very specific time. Next Tuesday morning, exactly at 10 o'clock. I shut down the terminal, removed my flash drive, and walked out into the cool, quiet night air. The trap was permanently set. The digital fuse was lit, burning silently in the background. For the next 3 days, I returned to the office and simply watched them. It was an incredibly surreal, almost out-of-body experience. I watched Julian strut through the main lobby, shouting orders at department heads and acting like the undisputed king of the world. I watched Chloe hold court in the corporate cafeteria, sipping her overpriced matcha latte and giving unsolicited career advice to terrified junior analysts. I smiled at them in the hallways. I held the elevator doors open for them. I looked them right in the eyes, perfectly aware that they were already dead. They were just walking corpses who had not yet realized their careers, their freedom, and their lives were completely over. The entire company was buzzing with an electric anticipation for the upcoming Q3 all-hands summit. It was the grandest event of the corporate calendar, held in our massive glass atrium. Rumors were flying through every single department that our current chief executive officer was preparing to announce his retirement, and the summit was going to serve as Julian's unofficial coronation. He was fully expected to be publicly named as the heir apparent, the undisputed future chief executive officer of Novapulse Logistics. He was preparing to ascend to the absolute peak of the corporate mountain, grinning from ear to ear, and I was standing quietly in the valley, holding the detonator, ready to blow the entire mountain to pieces. Tuesday morning arrived, bringing with it a sickening display of corporate opulence. The massive glass atrium of Novapulse Logistics had been completely transformed into a lavish banquet hall for the quarterly summit. Waitstaff in crisp black uniforms circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of imported champagne, while the gentle, sophisticated hum of a live string quartet desperately attempted to mask the hollow, fake congratulations echoing off the walls. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and unearned arrogance. I completely bypassed the bustling front rows and the complimentary breakfast buffets. I navigated to the absolute furthest edge of the auditorium, selecting a solitary folding chair in the darkest corner of the room. The heavy shadows cast by the massive overhead lighting rigs perfectly obscured my presence. I pulled my personal smartphone from my jacket pocket, firmly held down the power button until the screen faded entirely to black, and buried the device deep inside the bottom of my leather handbag. Today was not a day for distractions. I sat there in total, eerie silence, feeling the cold condensation from a simple plastic cup of iced tea dripping slowly onto my fingers. A thunderous wave of applause erupted through the atrium as Julian stepped confidently into the harsh glare of the center spotlight. He was completely in his element, radiating an aura of absolute invincibility. He gripped the edges of the polished wooden podium, leaned into the microphone, and launched into a meticulously rehearsed monologue. It was genuinely nauseating to witness. He preached passionately about our unmatched strategic vision, our dedication to systemic integrity, and most ironically, our unwavering commitment to absolute financial transparency. He delivered every single lie with such a smooth, practiced sincerity that it bordered on psychopathic. He was painting a masterpiece of corporate delusion, completely unaware that his canvas was already burning. Down in the front row, sitting squarely in the velvet-roped executive section, Chloe was practically glowing. She beamed up at the stage, her hands clasped tightly together in what looked like genuine admiration. As the crowd erupted into applause at another one of his hollow punchlines, she casually turned her head, letting her eyes sweep across the sea of employees. For one brief, fleeting second, her gaze pierced the shadows and locked directly onto mine. I saw the familiar, sickening flash of patronizing pity cross her features. She was looking at the broken, highly disciplined supply chain girl who had finally learned her place at the bottom of the food chain. I did not break eye contact. I did not frown. I simply raised my plastic cup of iced tea exactly 1 inch into the air, offering a silent, completely deadpan toast to her imaginary victory. She smirked, turning her attention back to the stage, entirely oblivious to the heavy steel guillotine hanging directly over her neck. I shifted my gaze upward to the giant digital clock mounted high above the emergency exit doors. The bright red numbers flipped perfectly to 10 o'clock in the morning. 40 miles away, deep inside a silent, dusty public library, an automated server script woke up from its hibernation and executed a single, irreversible command. The encrypted death dossier bypassed every single external firewall and launched itself straight into the targeted inboxes. I sat perfectly still in the dark, taking a slow, calculated sip of my iced tea. I stared at the back of Julian's head, counting silently in my mind. 3, 2, 1. A sudden sharp vibration shattered the quiet hum of the executive section, then another, and another. Within 5 seconds, a chaotic, terrifying symphony of notification chimes, urgent text alerts, and aggressive phone buzzes erupted simultaneously, echoing entirely from the front row where the board of directors and the major shareholders were seated. The illusion was over. The storm had finally arrived. The chief executive officer, seated directly in the center of the velvet-roped VIP section, pulled his vibrating smartphone from his tailored breast pocket. I watched his eyes scan the brightly lit screen. His jaw went completely slack. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked absolutely ghost-like. He tapped the screen with a trembling finger to open the attached file. I knew exactly what he was looking at. The bold header across the top of his screen read, "Anonymous transaction history and embezzlement evidence." He stood up so violently that his heavy wooden chair crashed backward onto the polished marble floor. "Shut off that microphone immediately," he barked, his voice violently cutting through the soft, elegant string music and echoing across the massive atrium. Julian froze right in the middle of a sentence about synergistic growth. His mouth hung open like a dying fish. Utter chaos erupted. Several major shareholders were already on their feet, screaming into their cell phones, frantically ordering their private financial teams to freeze every single corporate bank account immediately. Julian stood paralyzed on the grand stage, his arrogant, untouchable mask completely shattering into pieces of sheer, unadulterated panic. He turned around just in time to see his beautiful, fabricated presentation slides vanish into thin air. The Information Technology Department had already received the dossier. They remotely hijacked the main projector, replacing Julian's glorious growth charts with a blinding red screen displaying a system-wide emergency data lockdown order. I shifted my gaze toward the front row. Chloe was not smiling anymore. She scrambled out of her seat, practically tripping over her designer heels, making a desperate, breathless dash toward the rear exit doors. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. She needed to get to the Human Resources Department to physically wipe her local hard drives, but she did not even make it out of the hallway. The heavy double doors swung open, and the entire internal audit team stepped through, flanked by 4 massive, unsmiling building security guards. They formed an impenetrable human wall. The undeniable evidence of her forged digital signatures was already sitting in all of their inboxes, and she had absolutely nowhere to run. 30 minutes later, the real cavalry arrived. I had anticipated that the board of directors might try to handle this massive fraud internally to save face and protect the fragile stock price. I refused to let them bury my masterpiece. That is exactly why I had anonymously submitted the identical 40-page death dossier to the Federal Bureau of Investigation exactly 7 days prior. By the time the email blasted through the company network, the federal agents had already secured the parking garage. Dozens of agents wearing dark windbreakers swarmed the main lobby, The entire company watched in absolute, stunned silence as Julian and Chloe were paraded straight through the glass atrium, their wrists securely locked in cold steel handcuffs, their careers and their lives permanently destroyed in front of hundreds of employees. By 5 o'clock that evening, the corporate building was a silent ghost town. The chief executive officer summoned me up to his massive penthouse suite. When I walked in, he looked like he had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. His tie was undone, and he was sweating profusely through his expensive dress shirt. He had spent the entire day frantically reviewing the evidence and cross-referencing the vendor files. He finally realized I was the only person in the entire building who had tried to block the Apex contract from the very beginning. He practically begged me. He offered to refund my stolen quarterly bonus 5 times over. He even offered to promote me immediately to the now vacant Chief Operating Officer position, pleading with me to stay and help his remaining executives rebuild the shattered supply chain infrastructure. I stood there in total silence, observing a man who had entirely lost control of his own ship. I reached into my tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp, white envelope I had printed exactly 1 month ago. I placed it gently onto his massive mahogany desk, resting my plastic corporate identification badge perfectly on top. "Keep the money to pay your defense attorneys," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. "Your entire system is rotten from the foundation up." I turned around and walked out of the glass tower for the final time. As I stepped onto the pavement, the vibrant orange and purple hues of the city sunset washed over me. The distant wail of police sirens was still echoing through the concrete canyons, but inside my mind, there was only absolute, pristine silence. It was the quiet, profound peace of a victor who requires absolutely no applause. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Where is everyone tuning in from? I would absolutely love to read your comments down below. If you found today's story entertaining and satisfying, please do us a massive favor and support the channel by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon. Over there, you can listen to our absolute best, exclusive true stories featuring incredible, emotional voice acting that we simply cannot make public here on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Thank you again, and I will see you in the next one.